המשיח, אני מאמין, אני מאמין באמונו של אמו, בביאת המשיח, אני מאמין, משיח, 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 אמונו של אמו, בביאת המשיח, אני מאמין, אני מאמין באמונו של אמו, בביאת המשיח.
First, let me thank those that have helped to arrange this seminar. And we certainly hope that it will be once more, first thanking everyone that helped in the arrangement, the organization of this seminar today. And I hope that we'll all get a lot out of it. As customary amongst Jews, we'll start from the end, which is the last page of these pages that are printed in front of us. The simple reason is, as Professor Kalish said just a moment ago, we're a little bit rearranging the order of the lectures because one of our people is not here with us today. So we'll begin with a general topic that does not yet require a background lecture in regard to the Sfirot, to the 10 Sfirot and so forth, which we'll hear afterwards from Professor Kalish. We know that there are three general blessings, physical blessings, that everyone, whether Jew or non-Jew, asks for. One is good health, the second is family life, children, and the third is parnosos, is wealth, financial prosperity. So clearly the topic today that we're going to devote ourselves to is the third of those blessings, that which relates to financial prosperity or to wealth. So as a general introduction to today's seminar, we're going to now look at the concept of ashirut, which is wealth. And what does that mean? What is the deep spiritual meaning of wealth, and why is it actually justifiable for a Jew or even a non-Jew to pursue and to desire wealth? Why should one want to be rich? Maybe it's better to be poor. Why do we ask for monetary, not just stability, but even more than stability? So this is based, now we'll begin to read this chart. Some of our charts in front of us do have English translations or comments. This particular one does not. So that means that we'll have to read it in Hebrew and translate the words and then discuss the meaning of the concepts that we have here in front of us. So the title here of this page is Birkat Hashem Hita Ashir, a verse in Proverbs that says the blessing of God gives richness, gives wealth, meaning that wealth is a blessing. As here we say that wealth is a God-given blessing. Birkat Hashem Hita Ashir. The continuation of this very verse, if you'll see, on the third line on the left, it is written out the entire verse that reads, Birkat Hashem Hita Ashir, Velo Yosif Etzev Ima. The blessing of Hashem gives wealth, and it does not add, or it does not bring with it, together with it, any sorrow or any nervousness, etzev. It's all good. It's all a good feeling. There's a person, some people are unfortunately well-to-do, prosperous, but they can be very, very unhappy with their wealth. So what does the verse say? The verse says is that if wealth comes from God, is a blessing of God, it has no etzif to it, no sorrow, no troubleness, no nervousness to it whatsoever. It's all good. It's all a good blessing of God. What does that imply? Just like in every verse, when you have a positive statement in the Torah, that means that there's a negative counterpart. So once more, it means that there can definitely be wealth that does have, if it's not God-given, if it's not a blessing of God, then it does have etzev to it. It does have sorrow and trouble and nervousness to it. All right, now after this general title, we have here another three lines, which are three levels. Now let me just make one introductory remark to everything that we're going to discuss this today, which is that definitely we hope and pray that everyone will come out of today's seminar with some practical advice and understanding. But as taught in Kabbalah and Chassidut, the beginning of any change that a person makes in his life, any change for the good, first and foremostly depends upon changing his way of thinking. Meaning that I can't give you any practical advice to do anything if first your whole attitude towards that very objective that you're searching for, your whole attitude is not improved, in some way is not lifted up to a higher level of consciousness. So this is the utmost, most important thing to understand, that we're not just trying to give like practical steps, how to become rich in 3 easy steps or 4 easy steps. That's not the objective, and that's not the way. The way is how to think about this very topic, this very objective of wealth and of parnos and everything that's related, as a Jew should think, and realize and recognize that there are very different levels of thought, one above the other, and the higher and the deeper one is able to think about the topic, the subject itself, to that extent does that thought then descend into one's speech, into one's action, and becomes a vessel, a kli, for the blessing of Hashem, the blessing of God. So this is the most important introduction, that first a person has to rectify his thought. From thought comes speech, from speech comes action, and from action he creates vessels to receive blessing from on high. So now we're going to look at the 3 verses or phrases on the right, which are actually 3 levels of approaching God and creating a vessel to receive the blessing of wealth. On the other side, as parallel on the left, also are 3 sayings which correspond to these 3 levels of blessing. So now I'll first read the phrases and translate them, and then we'll begin to discuss them. On the right to the top, it says, "Uveirachacha Hashem Elokecha b'chol asher ta'aseh." It says that God, your God, blesses you in everything that you do. That's the literal translation. But how is this taught or explained in Kabbalah and Chassidut? It says that blessing comes to a person in everything that the person, that you yourself produce a vessel for. The word kol, all in Hebrew, also comes from the word kli. Kli is to make a vessel. Meaning in very simple language, the simplest language possible, as the common phrase would say, God helps he who helps himself. If the person has to do something himself, has to open up a business, has to create a vessel, and if he devotes himself and dedicates himself properly to creating a vessel for parnosa, for wealth, then the blessing of wealth will flow into that vessel that he has produced. This is always the way this verse is interpreted in Kabbalah and Chassidut. Uveirachacha Hashem Elokecha, God will bless you when? V'chol asher ta'aseh. When you yourself do something. But you have to get out and do something and build a business, build a firm, and God will bless it. This is level number 1 of consciousness. Level number 1, I mean below. There are 2 higher levels of consciousness. The next phrase, which is 1 level higher, is a part of a verse in Psalms, where the first phrase comes from the Torah itself, from Sefer Dvarim, from Deuteronomy. Uveiracha Hashem Elokecha b'chol asher ta'aseh. The next phrase, which reads V'hu yichalkelecha, is a part of a verse in Psalms. The entire verse reads Hashlecha al Hashem Yehovcha V'hu yichalkelecha. Thrust all of your desires on God, and He will sustain you. So as we said before, the word all, which is also the word for sustenance, kalkala, is related to the word in Hebrew kli, a vessel. What is this verse saying? This verse is teaching that sometimes a person tries to create himself, as we said before, but God helps he who helps himself. Often a person attempts in his life to create something, it doesn't work. He tries again, once more it doesn't work. What can he do in the end if he's not successful in the beginning? So the verse says, thrust all of your desires on God, and He will sustain you. This word, He will sustain you, this phrase, is read in Kabbalah and Chassidut to mean that He Himself, God, will create the vessels. Not only will He send the light. Always in Kabbalah we're taught that there are vessels and lights. In general, the human being from below has to create the vessel, and the light, which is the blessing, descends from God. Very often it says that the vessel always has to do with peace or harmony. That a person has to create a situation which is harmonious, which is peaceful, shalom. That's the vessel. This is actually the very last Mishnah of the oral Torah. That God did not find a vessel that is capable, able to receive, accept the blessing. His blessing, only peace. Meaning that in general, if a person wants to build anything in life, build a company, so the vessel which receives blessing is peace, is harmony. That's my responsibility. But once more, what happens if a person is not successful? So this verse teaches us a 1 level higher of consciousness, which is thrust yourself entirely on God, and He will sustain you. Once more as read, He will create the system, the organization of vessels that they themselves will receive the blessing. Now, we've just said that this is relating to a person that is unsuccessful. How can this very same level of consciousness apply and pertain to a person who is successful? Once more, if a person is successful, he made an effort, he made a maximal effort, he built a company, and the company is drawing down blessing and wealth, affluence from on heaven, how can he nonetheless reach this level that actually I am totally thrusting myself on God? And not only does the blessing descend from God, but even the vessels themselves are being created spontaneously from God. So the answer to this is to look a little bit deeper into this word. The word hu yechalkalecha is actually 2 times. It has the 2-letter sub-root in Hebrew of kol repeated twice. But the word kalkala in Hebrew is kol, kli, kli. In Kabbalah, this is interpreted to mean that he makes a plentitude, a multitude of vessels. Meaning that a person experiences, say a person has built a company. He experiences that the company is expanding. It's expanding at that rate. This is something that we'll talk about in the continuation. It's not expanding too fast, it's not expanding too slow. It has to expand at the perfect rate. There are more and more vessels are being built and incorporated into the corporation, into the company. That experience, that even though I have worked hard to create this situation, but there is some power present in the organization or in the company that is making it expand. Once more expand at the proper rate. This is called a ribui kelim, more vessels and more vessels to receive more blessing and more blessing. A person can be conscious right now that no matter how much I've put into it, how much work, the vessels themselves are being blessed and created and increasing at a steady and maybe accelerated rate from on high. When else do we express this concept of many kelim? Those of us that daven 3 times, that pray 3 times a day, so the second of the 18 or 19 prayers of Shmona Esrei, blessings, is Mechalkel Chayim Bechesed. We say that God sustains life with kindness, with loving kindness. How is that read also? What is the kavanah of that in Kabbalah? Life is the blessing. Chesed, kindness, refers to the kindness of God that produces and creates many, many vessels to receive the blessing of life. This is the way it's explained. This is the kavanah that is explained in Kabbalah and Chasilut. Mechalkel Chayim. God creates a multitude of vessels for the blessing of life, b'chesed, with kindness. Meaning that the kindness is the power that creates vessels to receive life. Mechalkel Chayim b'chesed. Once more, that thought is similar or more or less exactly the same as the thought expressed in this verse of Psalms, V'hu yechalkelecha. So once more, what have we said now? It doesn't just mean that a person is unsuccessful and therefore he has to thrust himself entirely on God. Even if a person is successful, he has to try to experience in his work that the multitude of vessels is itself being spontaneously generated from above. And if he will experience that experience of spontaneous generation of vessels from above, then certainly he will receive more and more infinite blessing in those vessels. Meaning that now the person knows that I have put something into I have started the ball rolling, as to say, but what's happening now is all directed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Both the vessels as well as the lights. The blessing. Now, what can be even higher state of consciousness than that? Both of these states of consciousness, both of them begin from below. In the terminology of Kabbalah and Chassidut, it's called itaruta deletata. There is a certain arousal from below. The parnasah, the blessing itself, is called lechem min haaretz. Lechem, as we say, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, every time that we eat bread, we bless Hashem that He gives us bread from the earth. Lechem min haaretz. Once more, the bread is the blessing, is the parnasah, the blessing of Hashem. But it comes out of the earth, it comes from below. Both of these two first levels of consciousness are still lechem min haaretz, bread from the earth. There's even the second one, that there is a spontaneous generation of vessels being directed from on high. It's nonetheless vessels, means that there first are vessels and then lights. If first there have to be vessels and then lights, the general state or category is still lechem min haaretz. Is it possible the other direction? That there is light without having to create or deal or trouble themselves with vessels at all, whatsoever. There is a possibility. A person can win $1 million on the lottery. He can inherit. Much easier ways he can inherit millions and millions of dollars without doing anything, without any effort whatsoever. That type of parnasah, that the wealth is given to you from heaven without having to do anything, min kof etzba in Hebrew. This is called lechem min hashamayim. Many Jews, this is the third phrase here, lechem min hashamayim, bread from heaven. That the bread falls from heaven. Where does this phrase appear in the Torah? This is in relation to the manna. That bread that we ate for 40 years whilst sojourning through the desert. That bread, that without that bread from heaven, we were unable to receive the Torah. It says, Lo nitna Torah ela le'ochlei haman bilavad. The Torah was only given to those people that eat manna. So what does that mean for us also? That the real Torah, even now, is only given that a person in his bread from earth, he makes the blessing hamotzi lechem min haaretz. But a person that experiences a certain level of manna, of lechem min hashamayim, what does that mean? Once more, it means as though I did nothing. It can also be a person that made a tremendous effort. But if his humility is to the extent that he feels in his heart, in his consciousness, that I did nothing whatsoever, and it all came from above, that's lechem min hashamayim. Very similar to what it says about the third temple. The first two temples were built by man from below. But the third temple descends from heaven, is lechem min hashamayim. So once more, this is a consciousness that can apply to anyone, or the person can have one of these three levels of consciousness. Either a consciousness of, I have to go out and work hard, and if I work hard, I'll be blessed. That's a true level of consciousness. Or a second consciousness that even the vessels, like the shop, that I opened the shop, and it's working out, the vessel itself, some experience that the vessel is I'm being helped all the time by God, that this vessel develops itself. Or an even higher level of consciousness, that as though, it doesn't mean I really am not doing anything. Because when we brought the two examples of a lottery or a Yerusha, an inheritance, so really the person did nothing. It just came to him. But we're trying to make that apply also to every person's situation, life situation. That even if I actually am working, there's a highest level of tzaddik, v'amech kulam tzaddikim. Every Jew can reach this level, that as though I am doing nothing and everything is descending from heaven. In the terminology of Kabbalah, this means that the experience is that the vessels are being constructed from the light itself. Or in the terminology of Kabbalah, abut horot nithavu hakelim, from the thickening or the materialization of the lights become vessels. Once more, the first two levels are that first one has to have a system, a network of vessels. The first level is that you just have to have a simple vessel, and in your simple vessel that you put in so many hours of work in your shop, Hashem will send blessing. The second level is a more complex system of vessels, that you are experiencing this system itself as being directed and generated from God. But it's first the vessels, and after vessels, the light enters. It's just like when Adam was created, the first man, first his body was created, and only after the body was created did Hashem blew into his nostrils the the spirit and soul of life. First body, then soul. But there's a higher level, as though the body itself is being created from the soul. That the soul or the light is descending, and the light is going through some physical process of change, which actually now in modern physics we have very good examples and parables for this, of light, say a photon or light energy changing into elementary particles, physical particles. That's called mehit'abut ha'orot nithavu ha'kelim. And this is the experience that a person is experiencing. That the light itself means that the wealth itself is making the store, is creating the store, is creating the situation, once more the vessel of the parnasa. This is called the experience of lechem min hashamayim. And now let's see what the three corresponding phrases on the left read. The first phrase on the top is a famous phrase from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, that says, Eizu ashir hasamech bechelko. Who is rich? Once more, we're talking about the general topic of richness. And it's a good thing to be rich. Every Jew should be rich. Should be physically rich, should be spiritually rich, as we'll go on to explain. In Pirkei Avot it says that richness does not depend on your bank account, on how much money you have in the bank. That's not what richness depends upon. Richness depends upon your feeling. Are you happy in your portion, or are you unhappy in your portion? Do you believe in God, that God in His divine good providence gives you just exactly what you need, not too little and not too much, because sometimes too much is also bad for a person. He gives you just exactly what you need, and you're happy, satisfied in what God provides you with. That's called Eizu Ashur. Who is the true rich man? The true rich man is a person that is satisfied and happy with his portion. All right, so now this phrase corresponds to the first level of consciousness of wealth, which also, as we'll go on to explain, as we're trying now to, once more, to deepen our awareness and consciousness of how to relate to all of our attempts that we daily make to achieve parnasa and wealth, to rectify our manner of thought. If a person says, I'm happy with my portion, a person is happy with my portion, it means that he does something minimal, or even he makes an effort. As we said before, God helps he who helps himself. And whatever he receives into his vessel, he opens up a shop. As much as he earns, he's happy with what he earns. He doesn't try too hard to expand the business, because he's happy with what he has. So he has his little shop, and he makes enough parnasa for his family to support his family, and he is happy. So that's a great high level, because in the final analysis, a person on earth should be happy. If he's happy, what difference does it make how much money he has in the bank and how much property he owns? As we'll explain in a moment, this richness, once more, Chazal, our sages say that this is richness. Richness is being happy with how much you have, with your portion. Because it's God-given. You did your part, and he did his part, and you're satisfied. This depends spiritually on a person that has hachna'ah. Hachna'ah means submission, that he surrenders himself. He experiences submission to God. It's a certain basic level of humility, that he doesn't have lust for more and more and more. He's satisfied because he has hachna'ah. At this point, we'll have to explain that the Baal Shem Tov, the the founder of the Hasidic movement that I'm sure we've all heard of, says that, or teaches us, that any complete cycle of divine service has to go through 3 stages. Stage number 1, hachna'ah, which is submission, surrender. Stage number 2, havdalah, which means separation, as we'll go on to explain what that means for us. And stage number 3, hamtakah, which is sweetening. First, a person has to surrender, then he becomes separate from evil. He becomes identified with the good, with the positive. And then finally he experiences total sweetness, sweetening of his world, of his consciousness. So actually these 3 levels, these 3 attitudes themselves form this cycle of hachna'ah, havdalah, hamtakah. The first is who is rich. Once more, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It just matters if you have hachna'ah to Hashem, you'll be happy with what you receive, what you get. Now the second phrase says something different. It's also a famous phrase in Chazal that says, don't measure wealth or poverty by a physical measure. Wealth versus poverty is really a function of da'at, of knowledge, of consciousness. This is the next phrase, which reads, En ashir ela bidat. There is no person that is rich, whose richness really applies to the depth of one's consciousness. What is this saying? The first phrase was talking about a physical reality. It says that the pshat, the simple meaning, was that you should be happy with what you have, physically. Be satisfied with what you have. The second phrase is already talking about a spiritual dimension of wealth. And it's saying that the real wealth is not just being happy with whatever physical amount you own, but it depends upon how much knowledge, and knowledge means knowledge of God, how much consciousness of God you possess. That's your bank account. Your bank account is in your mind. Right, so this is not exactly the same as who is wealthy, he who is happy in his portion. It's saying that wealth is at a different level altogether. Wealth is a function of da'at, of knowledge. Meaning also that even secularly we can understand this. It's better to have knowledge, to be wise, to learn, to invest in education, in self-education, or to invest in self-fulfillment, of working and being able to perfect one's latent talents. That's much more, that is true wealth, much more than physical wealth. This is an example, a classic example of what the concept of havdalah means. Havdalah means that I understand that very same thing that I was driving for, that objective that I was driving for, I appreciate it and understand it at a different level altogether. I take it out of its physical context and bring it into a spiritual perspective. That wealth is not just being happy and satisfied with my physical possession, because this is as much as I deserve, but it's consciousness. Now that consciousness, how does that relate and correspond to the second level of blessing that we said before? A person who has da'at, it's very easy to understand that if you have this level of da'at, you can experience in the physical routine itself how the physical is being generated by God. How there are a multitude of vessels which are being produced that appear to all be within a physical context. But it's really not physical, because what does that mean? That means that you're aware of God. That you have that, you're experiencing God. How do you experience God as far as wealth, going back once more into the physical context? By seeing that everything is hashgacha pratit, something that we'll discuss in a moment. Everything is being directed by God. And especially in my esek, in my business itself, every little detail, the most minute detail, is all being generated by God. And God is actually making things grow and expand and develop. Right, so that's why this phrase is taught, this phrase of Ein Ashir El Bedat corresponds to the second level, which is called V'hu Yechalkalecha. Now the third is our initial phrase, which was the title of this page that we have in front of us, that literally reads, the blessing of Hashem makes you rich, and makes you rich in the sweetest possible manner. That there's no bitterness to your richness whatsoever. So it's all, when does a person have that experience of Birkat Hashem Ita Ashir, Velo Yosif Etzev Ima, that it's all sweet, because it's all God-given, meaning that everything is now flowing down from heaven. Lechem min Hashem, it's all bread from heaven, it's all manna from heaven. That the manna, it says, was tasted, everyone, in exactly the way he wanted to taste it. Exactly the flavor that he wanted to taste, that's what he tasted in the manna. It was the sweetest possible experience of the blessing of wealth. So once more, therefore, this phrase, which was once more the title, the verse from Mishlei, from Proverbs, Birkat Hashem Hita Ashir, Velo Yosif Etzev Ima, that corresponds to Lechem min Hashamayim. And once more, this is called the experience of Hamtaka, of sweetening. But in wealth itself, then a person has to go through this cycle first and foremost of Hakna'ah. Hakna'ah means being satisfied with what one owns, with what one receives. The second is to realize that true wealth is being conscious of God. And if one is conscious of God, one is conscious of Hashgacha Pratit, of divine providence, and one is conscious of the divine element and power in everything that happens in the physical realm and cycle, and how everything is being generated spontaneously from on high. That is called Havdalah, that one's consciousness has moved, has become separate from what previously his consciousness was, thinking that the world is controlled by laws of nature alone. And now his consciousness has changed to one of divine providence. And then finally, the third level is that the blessing spontaneously flows down from heaven. And when blessing is God-given from heaven, the wealth, there is no sorrow and no bitterness to it whatsoever. It's all sweet. All right, now to try to summarize now and make it a little bit shorter, the next three lines, just now explain this in short, in the Bekitzur, shortly, say that there are three people in our tradition, two from the written Torah, and one, the last, from the oral Torah, who possess the same name. A name is a very essential thing. The name reflects the very essence of he who is called by that name. There are three great people in our tradition who are called Eliezer. Eliezer literally means, my God is my aid. God helps me. The first Eliezer is the servant and actually the manager of the great firm that was created and begun from the first Jew, by the first Jew, Abraham Avinu, his commander-in-chief was Eliezer Eved Abraham. Besides controlling all of his possessions, he also was sent, as we probably all remember in the Torah, to search for a wife suitable to enter into the home of Abraham, the first Jew to marry Yitzchak Avinu, the son of Abraham, which he successfully fulfilled his mission in finding Rivka, Rebecca, for Isaac. What was his sign? His sign was a woman that expresses great, infinite loving kindness. Lifnim v'lifnim mishurat adin, much more than is required even by the best human manners and consideration, way more than that. And that sign was fulfilled by Rebecca, and therefore he saw that she was fitting for Abraham, to enter into the house of Abraham and to marry Isaac. It says that in that process of finding a wife for Isaac, he underwent a spiritual conversion. Obviously, even before then, since he was once more the commander-in-chief of all of the possessions of Abraham, he certainly was a believer. Abraham had educated him, so to a certain extent he already had converted, quote unquote. But his total metamorphosis of being is explained at depth in Kabbalah. His own metamorphosis happened at this moment that he found, that he experienced and saw the infinite loving kindness of Rebecca, and he's a matchmaker, mated Rebecca to Isaac. Who is the second Eliezer? Maybe one more word about the first Eliezer. It says that he didn't even die. He entered alive into the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the Machpelah cave, and there he stands on the entrance of the cave, and he, to this very day, is the servant, the attendant of the patriarchs, our patriarchs and our matriarchs that are buried in Ma'arat HaMachpelah. That's where he is to this present day. Eliezer Eved Abraham. Who is the second Eliezer? Which ones were the second, as explained in Kabbalah, the second level of consciousness that God is my aid. This name, Hashem Eliezer, Hashem Eli, Keli, Ozer. The second is the second of the two sons of Moses. There's obviously an elevation, that Eliezer, Eved Abraham, becomes now the son of Moshe Rabbeinu. Eliezer ben Moshe. Aaron also had a son whose name was Elazar, but not Eliezer. They're two similar names, but they're not exactly the same. Also in Chazal, there are many rabbis who are called Elazar, but there's only one great sage who is called Eliezer. He is the third one here. After Eliezer, the son of Moshe, there is Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, the great Rabbi Eliezer, who was one of the mentors of Rabbi Akiva and many other of the greatest of the sages. He is the only of all of the sages that's called great. The only person in the Tanakh who is also called great, the great one, is Abraham himself, who is called Adam HaGadol Ba'anakim, the great man of the giants. That's an expression in the Bible for Abraham. Adam HaGadol Ba'anakim, the greatest of the giants. The only sage who is called Gadol is Rabbi Eliezer. But in some way, Eliezer, who began as the servant, the slave of Abraham, now becomes that very great figure that Abraham himself was. Ha'adam ha'gadol ba'anakim. Right, so just in short, these three, this is like a series of reincarnations of Gilgulei Neshamot, from Eliezer to Eliezer to Eliezer. The first Eliezer is taught represents that consciousness, being the slave, the servant of Abraham, that consciousness that I work hard and God sends the blessing. God helps me. Eliezer, God helps me. I have to work hard, and God sends the blessing. That itself, that consciousness then goes on to become reincarnated in his merit, the merit of the first Eliezer. One proceeds to come back at a higher level of consciousness, which is V'hu Yichal Kalecha. That's Eliezer ben Moshe. And finally, one achieves the very highest level of consciousness, which is that of Rabbi Eliezer Agadol, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, which is like that of Lechem min Hashamayim and Birkat Hashem, the bread from heaven, and the blessing of Hashem gives wealth without any etziv, without any sorrow or bitterness to it whatsoever. Once more, to explain this would require more time. That we just say now in short that these are called these three states of consciousness that we described are these three souls, are reflected by these three souls whose name is the same. Eliezer, meaning God helps me. All right, now even more in short, just to continue and conclude this this page in front of us. You'll see the word, and this is a Kabbalistic meditation upon the word itself, ashir. Let's make one point that relates in a certain degree to the second level that we just discussed, which is that of ein ashir el bedat, that to be ashir means to acquire a deeper dimension of knowledge, of being able to experience in God, and not experience physical laws of nature alone. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses himself, and this has to do with Eliezer ben Moshe. When we read last week in the Torah, he was given the Torah, he was given the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments on them. Then we know, and this we'll read in another few weeks in the Torah, that because of the Chet HaEgel, he broke the first tablets, and then he was commanded by God to himself make new tablets, to chisel out of the mountain new tablets. Psolocho. Hashem says, chisel them out yourself. The first tablets I gave you, now you have to do it yourself. As Chazal say the reason for that. One of the readings there of psolocho, that the word psol, which means to chisel and to make the new tablets yourself, the second tablets, comes from the word psolet. Psolet means the waste products. And Chazal say that the tablets were made from precious stone. It was like diamond, or even more precious than diamond. The construction of the tablets was the greatest diamond factory ever. So it's clear that the waste of that diamond is once more a stone which is more precious than diamond. The waste itself is of infinite wealth. So Chazal say, "Hapsolet yesh lecha," that you chisel it out, and all of the waste product, when you're chiseling the diamond, you're cutting the diamonds for the tablets, all of the waste will belong to you yourself, personally. Hapsolet tiyeh shelcha. So what do Chazal say about that? Mikan nitasher Moshe Rabbeinu harbe. From here, Moshe Rabbeinu became very, very wealthy, infinitely wealthy, because the psolet of the tablets belonged to him. In Chasidut we're taught that why does Moshe Rabbeinu have to be physically wealthy? Once more, this is just to return into our original question, why is wealth a value? At a deeper level, why is wealth a value for a Jew? So in Kabbalah and Chassidut is taught that there are certain levels of consciousness, even of prophecy, that a prophet cannot conceive and achieve if he himself personally is not wealthy. And it says that in order for Moshe Rabbeinu to reach higher levels of prophecy and higher levels of conception, of divine conception, he had to have this physical wealth, which was the psolet, the waste product of the tablets themselves, to belong to him personally. So once more, this was another very, very important point that has to do with Eliezer ben Moshe. It's related to that level of Eliezer, which is related to the fact that wealth, not only is wealth how much you know, To that extent of how much you know, that is your true inner wealth at the level of separation, Havdalah, but vice versa is also true, that the more wealth you have physically, the more you are able to know. Very similar to what Chazal say, that if a person has possessions, has a beautiful home and beautiful furniture, that is marchiv et da'ato shel adam. It widens the da'at of the human being and makes it able, the human being, to conceive more and more da'at because of the physical wealth. Once more, meaning that physical wealth is a means towards a spiritual end. And where do we find that? The epitome of that? By Moses himself. That he reached higher and higher levels of consciousness due to the fact that he was given this physical wealth. Right now we continue to look at the word ashir, which means a wealthy man. Very often in Kabbalah, one, in order to meditate upon a word, one has to write out the letters in full, because every letter is a word. Ashir is 4 letters, and if you read it like Chinese here, from up to down, so that is each letter in full. The 2 fillings in of the letters are its innate pregnancy, or its innate potential. Because every letter is pregnant with latent potential. And when one meditates in Kabbalah on the way that the word is as spelled out, as each letter spelled out individually, that is a revelation and manifestation of all of its latent potential. Right now, we also know that every letter in the Hebrew language has a numerical counterpart to it. And we will not now calculate it in detail. We'll just say that when the word is written out like this, and it's also very interesting that the 4 letters of this word, a rich man, are the basic 4 letters in the Hebrew language whose name means a physical limb of the body. For instance, the second letter of the alphabet is bet, means a house. The first letter, aleph, either means cattle or has other meanings to it. But the 4 basic letters whose names are physical limbs of the body are these 4 letters of Ashir. How do they read? I, ayin, shin. The letter shin means shein, which is a tooth, teeth. Then comes yud, which means hand, yad. And finally reish, which means head. So you have eyes, teeth, and hands, and head. Well, for this I'm just saying, by the way, without explaining why this complex totality of those letters which mean these 4 limbs of the body are constructed together to read Ashir, a rich man. The simple meaning is that a rich man has to have control of all of these 4 concepts, both physically and spiritually. He has to be in control of his eyes and his teeth. Very often the teeth means the passion of eating, or the passion of consuming. He has to be in control of his hands. He has to be in control of his head. What is the numerical value of all of this? 1,020. In words, if this is calculated numerically, it all comes out to be, as I said here on the page, 1,020. Now we'll go through this in short. 1,020 is 10 times 102. 102 is the word emunah. Emunah is faith. The word faith itself is a permutation of 2 words, manhu, if you can spell out the letters. When the manna first, we talked before about the manna. The manna is the ultimate parnasah, the ultimate experience of wealth. Manna from heaven. When the manna first fell the first time, the people didn't recognize it, didn't know what it was, didn't understand it. They said, manhu, what is this? Those 2 words, manhu, what is this? That is those 5 letters are the permutation of the word emunah. That what this is is a consummate personification, as it were, of faith. This is faith. This is the ultimate expression of faith. Even we know that many Jews, at the end of their daily prayers in the morning, say the whole Parashat Aman, which is a skula, which is good for Parnassah, it says. Many people that want to be blessed with Parnassah recite every day after the morning prayers the section of the Torah of the giving of the manna, the man. What is the simple reason for that? Because one wants to reach this highest level of consciousness of lechem min hashamayim. And also to know that one's Parnassah is devar yom b'yomo, it's day by day. The manna didn't last over, didn't keep over from day to the next day. It was devar yom b'yomo, every day by itself. That's the blessing of the manna. It's all an experience of faith, of emunah. So once more, an ashir, as written out in full, equals 10 times emunah. What does that mean, 10 times emunah? That his faith permeates throughout all of the 10 powers of his soul, as will be explained in our next talk, what those are. The 10 times in Kabbalah of something means that this particular force or power permeates all of the 10 levels of the soul. So it means that a consummate rich man is he whose faith has permeated all of the 10 levels of his soul. And then his consciousness is totally one of manna, the highest level that we discussed before, of lechem min hashamayim. What does it say thereafter? It says thereafter another phrase. This is a phrase from one of the most important central phrases in the scroll of Esther that we're going to read another month on Purim and Mirza Hashem. A very beautiful phrase that has to do with profit, with making profit. The word for profit in Hebrew is the same as space, like space between two objects, which is the same as spirit, which is the same as wind. It's all the same word, ruach. And the revach are the same word in Hebrew, but especially space between two physical objects. Nothing between two states of something. That is called a revach, that there is space. And that very same word for space means profit, to make profits. So also this is a deep, very deep point in itself, that to be creating profits means to be creating spaces between objects. To be creating spaces, that is creating profit. Now, about that concept of revach v'hatzalah, once more, this phrase, whoever is familiar with Megillat Esther certainly remembers that revach v'hatzalah ya'amod la'Yehudim makom acher. Space is an idiom which is synonymous for salvation. Salvation and saving will stand up, will come to the Jewish people from another place. Mimakom acher. So the simple, when we just read this phrase by itself, it means that if you want to make money, you want to make profit, so you have to go someplace else. Because revach v'hatzalah ya'amod la'Yehudim makom acher. Wherever you happen to be, the profit is coming from someplace else. Even that very last phrase of makom acher, someplace else, equals b'gematria parnassah in Kabbalah. But parnassah is someplace else, not here, it's someplace else. Revach ve'hatzalah, maybe some people are already having this thought in mind, that salvation is going to come from someplace else. So that's actually a consciousness, a Jewish consciousness. Revach ve'hatzalah ya'amod la'Yehudim makom acher. That consciousness of someplace else, what does someplace else mean? Some unknown source. That itself is the secret of faith. Faith is called the unknowable head. That I don't know where the profit is going to come from. So once more, one of the first points here of understanding what the proper attitude towards making money or becoming profitable is that profit is an empty space between two givens. There is some empty space which, in my consciousness, is something unknowable, called makom acher, another place that that's where the parnasa comes from, that's where the revach comes from. That's where this whole phrase of revach v'atzalah, ya'amod la'yodim makom acher, also exactly equals this 1020, which is the word ashir written in full. Now what's written here in the continuation, we'll also look at it. It's a very beautiful form. This is an example of what is often done in Kabbalah. I count the number of letters in this phrase, Revach v'atzalah ya'amod la'yodim makom acher. I see there are 28 letters. Exactly the same as the first verse in the Torah. If there are 28 letters, the phrase can be constructed as a triangle of 7. What does a triangle mean? It means the sum of all numbers from 1 to 7. So I can write the letters as a triangle of 7. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's called the triangle of 7. So since there are 28 koach letters in this phrase, I construct it as a triangle. This, once more, this is something that's very often done in Kabbalah, to construct a phrase based upon the number of its letters or words as a geometric form, and then see what happens. That was what intended in the first place. So what happens here is, first of all, I see that the baseline, the bottom line of the triangle is makom acher. As we said before, that makom acher is parnasa b'gematria. A Jew always has to convert the word acher, other, into echad. By adding a little dot to the reish, acher becomes echad, which also is now not the time to go into it length. If instead, where does that phrase makom echad appear? It appears at the beginning of the Torah and creation, the third day of creation, that all the waters were gathered to makom echad. How much does makom echad equal? It says that makom echad equals staka, stoko, charity. The tikkun, as parnasa, comes from makom acher. But what you have to do with it is convert makom acher into makom echad. It has to go to the right place. Now what is done in such an example in Kabbalah? We see that the way that this is, we printed it out, this triangle of 7, there is one letter in the middle. The letter in the middle is a daled here. It's printed out in different print in order to emphasize the cycles. But when you have a triangle of 7, you have one letter in the middle, then you have one triangle around it, and another triangle around that. So there are 3 levels. Right, now what does one further do? Again, this is a targil, this is an example of a Kabbalistic numerical meditation or contemplation. One translates those 3 levels into numbers, and one receives a series of 4, where Dalet is 4, and the triangle around the Dalet is 116, and the triangle, the big triangle around that, equals exactly 900. 900, we see that there is a very beautiful phenomena going on here. 900 is 30 squared. 4 is 2 squared. 30 and 2 spell the word lev, heart. 116 in the middle is 10 squared plus 4 squared. 100 is 10 squared, 16 is 4 squared. That spells the word yad, hand. Some relationship here between the perfect heart and the perfect hand. Now, even more, when we take these 3 numbers and make it into a quadratic series, a quadratic expression, how does one do that? By looking at the differences, called finite differences. How much is skipped? What is the revach? The revach is how much you skip. The revach between 4 and 116, you see, is 112. The revach between 116 and 900 is 784. 784 is 28 squared. But what is the relation there between these two hefreshim, these 2 differences, these 2 finite differences? We see that the second one is 7 times the first one. If you look at it, calculate it, you'll see that 784 is exactly 7 times 112. It's a very amazing phenomenon, mathematical phenomenon here. Then you take the final difference, the difference of the two differences, and for this is necessary in order to create a quadratic formula. It means an expression, a mathematical expression that has n squared in it. The final base number is 672, which is obviously, since 784 is 7 times 112, it means that 672 is 6 times 112. That's the base, that's some power. What does this base level mean? It's some power which is generating this progression. Now, the line underneath that says what that number represents in Kabbalah, 672. The most important phrase for us, again we'll do it in short, is the second one, because the second one comes from today's Torah reading. Today's Torah reading discusses the temple, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, to make a temple for God in order that He dwell in the temple. And the very first thing that is to be constructed, made in the temple, is the ark, and above the ark the cherubim, the 2 cherubim, which represent perfect divine love and unity of God and the Jewish people. The 2 kruvim above the holy ark. That expression in today's Torah reading, Shnaim kruvim, the 2 kruvim, that is one of the important phrases and secrets in Kabbalah that equals this number 672, which means the generating force of Parnassah. As we said before, that one of the generating forces of Parnassah, of Revach v'Atala Ya'amod La'Yodim Makom Achar, of being an Ashir, being rich, is peace and love. That phrase, Shnaim Kruvim, equals as well the unity of Mashpia and Mekabel, the next thing that's written here. The giver and the receiver, the harmony or the yizun, the balance between giver and receiver. Because once more, the 2 Kruvim represent God and the Jewish people at an equal height, an equal level. It's that one is giving and one is receiving, but it's in perfect balance. And so that, once more, represents also one's consciousness, a perfect balance between giving and receiving. Right, there are other things here that we won't now explain. Afterwards also, we will, just to leave it for whoever has a tooth for mathematics. A tooth means a desire for. Whoever likes mathematics, so as soon as I have this base number of 672, then I can generate more numbers. I can see where this progression is going to, how it expands infinitely. So very often in Kabbalah, one begins a progression with 3 numbers, and then one goes on to expand it to 7 numbers, or sometimes to 10 or to 13 numbers, and see what happens. Right, so what's written out here is seeing what happens, and we won't explain that. Whoever, again, once more has a tooth for this, a love for this, can try to meditate on what happens here when this expression, which we derived from this phrase, Revach v'Hatzalah, Ya'amod La'Yodim Makom Acher, which equals the word Ashir, a rich man, in full, but manifesting all of the potential of his wealth, equals this phrase, and this phrase is constructed as this triangle, and this triangle suggests this mathematical progression and what happens to that. All right, so with this we concluded our first talk, which was, once more, is just trying to get a little bit of moisture into our system, and to discuss the concept of wealth, and that true wealth and becoming a vessel, a good vessel to receive the blessing of wealth from God, from heaven, depends upon rectified consciousness. And just as any other concept in Kabbalah and Chassidut, to rectify something means that you have to go through 3 stages in relation to that thing itself that you're trying to rectify. And those 3 stages are called always submission, submission in relation, say, here to the physical given state, that you accept what you have and you're happy with what you have. That's the first stage of rectification of consciousness. Then, understanding that really that very objective should be understood and should be taken at its spiritual level. And as soon as it's taken at its spiritual level, it will also immediately have an effect on the physical level. But it essentially is a spiritual thing, wealth, which is ein ashir elo bedat. And finally, to experience an influx of infinite blessing from on high, lechem min hashamayim, blessing that is totally sweet, having no negative vibes to it whatsoever. V'lo yosif etzev ima. So this was number 1. Thank you. Why Moshe Rabbeinu needed to be rich in order to achieve higher levels of prophecy and so forth, and consciousness. The simple reason is that we're taught in Kabbalah, and this is a topic that we once more cannot go into length, that all lights which descend from above are sparked in a certain way by redeemed sparks that ascend out of matter. When a soul, a Jewish soul, why is it really good that Jews especially be rich? Because wealth that comes to a Jewish soul is elevating sparks, divine sparks, which previously were entrapped and imprisoned in nature. And by those sparks being redeemed and elevated, that once more that awakens or that arouses lights to descend from above. So even in relation to Moshe Rabbeinu, who is certainly wise and a prophet, no matter what, in his own sense, if he possesses control, even for a Jew to be in control of the physical realm, that opens his soul up to higher and higher levels of knowledge and wisdom and even prophecy. Let's give another simple example. If the Jewish people is in exile, and we have no real control over the world, even over our own country, our own land, that's called exile, and it means that the whole soul is in a very, very confined state. It's very closed. It's not open. As soon as we become what's called a balabayit, a possessor of what is intended to be ours, our physical grounding, that opens up the soul. There's something about the physical world that it has these sparks in it which open the soul to higher and higher levels of consciousness. Yes?
I would also see that people who have tremendous wealth, just the opposite is true, that it closes their eyes.
That's what we said at the very, very beginning, that from this verse, that if the wealth is God, a blessing from God, then it has no negative effects to it. That very verse implies that a wealth which is not a blessing from God has the most negative sides to it.
Okay, last question.
Just to follow up, that the more property and possessions a person has, the greater the anxiety one has.
All right, so that's
take away from spirituality?
All right, so that's exactly referring to, say, a Benoni who has not reached this level. Let's interpret it in this way. If a person himself is marben nechasim, he has many, many possessions, and his consciousness is that it's mine, and I have to take hold of, I have to retain hold on my possessions, because I made the possessions, I succeeded in acquiring these possessions, and even now I have to continue to hold on strong to the possessions. They don't run away through my fingers. So that type of taking hold of possession, that ego, is what brings anxiety. That's exactly what this verse is saying, that if the consciousness is, we say everything depends on where your mind is at, where your thought is at. If my thought is marben nechasim, that I have loads of possessions, that means that I have loads of worries. That's called marben nechasim marbe da'aga. But if my consciousness is that it's purely the blessing of God and there's no etzev, this is a verse, but you're asking a good question. You're asking a ma'amar chazal, a saying of the sages, in contrast to an explicit verse in the Bible. So it's obvious that there can't be a contradiction between the two. It means that they must be talking about different people. What is the difference between two different people? Where their mind is at. So there's one person that his mind is marbe nechasim, and then it's marbe da'aga. And there's another person that his mind is at a level of birkat Hashem hita ashir, that the blessing of God is what gives wealth, and then v'lo yosif etzavima, there's no anxiety to it whatsoever. But that itself is called hamtaka, sweetening, which has to follow two previous stages. In general, that level is a level of tzaddikim, so we could say simply that Pirkei Avot is talking about a normal person who has not yet reached that very high level. And for him, many, many possessions, but once more that he's holding on to and I've produced, that brings to him much anxiety.
I suggest that either you ask while we are in break, or you have many other lectures.
So whoever has a question can come up and ask.